While my colleague Geoff is passing out one kind of page overview, I figured you didn't want the PowerPoint. So I just give you kind of the recap. I'm Karen Loftus. I'm Director of Leadership Development with the Arizona School Boards Association. And as a Scottsdale resident and a parent of a Desert Mountain grad, we have really enjoyed living in Scottsdale and being part of the district. And so when we were approached about the reaccreditation thing and the question about the governing board, that was fed through Bonnie to me. I said, yeah, love to talk about it. And so let me make sure I know which one's working. It's this one, not that one. This one? Third one's the card? Okay, all right. So we wanted to just cover with you what some of the things are that governing boards in the state of Arizona do. So, the first question that I would ask if I were you guys is, well, why us? Why are we here to talk to you? So ASBA is the state association that supports public education and supports school boards in the districts across the state. My job specifically is to train school board members across the entire state. So my team and I go out and do various kinds of training. And so when you look at what our mission is, it is really about supporting the elected governance, meaning in your case the 5 elected and or nominated board members. And so board members join a board by either running for election and then being put on the board, or if there is a vacancy on a board during that individual's term, so someone moves, leaves, dies, whatever it is, then the Maricopa County, in our case, Maricopa County Superintendent of Schools is able to have people submit their interest for the position, and he will then go through a process to nominate the individual. So that's a process Dr. Covey's involved with that I meet those folks too and speak with them. So we're involved in a lot of things, my kind of aspects, the training side. Geoff here is heavily involved in the advocacy side, and if you know he or Janice, they are the face of ASBA down at the Capitol and representing our kids in Arizona public education every single day. So we couldn't do it without him. Yeah.
I get to see Lisa down there all the time. It's pretty great.
Yeah. So let's just start with some really basics. So what's the difference between a board and a superintendent? And so sometimes when I talk, I use the word governing board versus school board, but they're synonymous, and so that using the term governing board, I think, helps you identify that really it's the role of the board to govern a variety of things, whereas it's a superintendent's responsibility to manage what's going on. And so from a perspective of what is the stuff that a governing board does, is they have one individual that they have as an employee, and that's the superintendent. So they're responsible for doing all the normal performance management stuff for that one individual. And it's the superintendent's responsibility to do that very same thing to make sure that happens for everybody else in the district. Another aspect that the board is involved in is setting direction and policy, and we're going to cover this a little bit more. But if you were to actually print out the policies for Scottsdale Unified School District, it would be about this thick. And I will show you the link from our website as well as your district website of how to get to the policies. But you're thinking, what the heck's a policy and why do we care about that? The policies are things that the district has to abide by, sometimes by law, state law, city law, county law. Best practice, and it is all the things that the governing board is responsible for approving and making sure the infrastructure is there so that the superintendent and his administration can actually implement all those things. And then the other piece of the puzzle, like any best practice, not only is it important to make sure that the policy is set and that the goals are in process, and somebody's working on them, but you got to complete the rest of the picture and coming back and monitoring, so how are we doing on that stuff? And so when you compare that to the superintendent, the role of the superintendent is that day-to-day oversight and management of the staff, the district, and all the things that are going on in there. And so they're the ones that through his cabinet are going to be implementing all the policies that the board has set up. So as an example, and this is on the sheet here, so what you'll see is, one way to look at it is thinking about the governance team, or the governing board handles the what of the district, and the superintendent and administration handles the how. And so when you look at the kind of work they do, the work that the board you're going to see is, again, policies, really important piece. Front end, why are we here? What are we doing? Is everything we're voting on in alignment with our mission, vision, and values? And then the superintendent is responsible for making sure that all of that stuff gets done in a way that represents what they've been tasked to do. So as an example, and I'm using this word outside of the boardroom very clearly, and I physically mean outside of the boardroom, when they're not sitting up there behind their nameplates. Their official power is when they're sitting in a public meeting doing public business. And so that is when the 5 board members are really fulfilling the role of the governing board. But when you're physically outside of that function, you have no more authority than you or I do. And so that individual board member, unless authority has been granted to them by a vote of the governing board to say, board member so-and-so, we task you with going off and doing this, let's vote on that, all approved, all opposed. You know, it's literally has to be happening that way. And so outside of a meeting, that individual has no greater right than you or I do to come into a school, to request things, to do anything other than the work that they're doing in the physical boardroom, which is heavily, as we talked about the policy side. So, you know, when you think about this, so if that's outside, let's think about inside. So the circle represents the time that they're in an official board meeting. And so when you look at what is happening here, there are kind of 3 aspects of what they're going to be, a governing board's going to be working on. The first one, the commitments, that has to do with making sure that they all are on the same page. So whether that be the core values, the beliefs of the district, how they're going to protocol-wise handle their business, and making sure that the structure they have is in place. It's all in alignment so that student focus, student achievement is in that center area. Another aspect they're physically doing in a meeting is the governance practices. And so when you think about what those are, they're really 3 pieces. One is a commitment to board development. So whether your teachers or your staff use professional learning communities, PLCs, or something as their means of developing themselves, the governing board members, plural, are their own little PLC in a sense, right? And so they're responsible for developing themselves on understanding what's going on in the law, and in the district, in the policies, and voting on behalf of what is best for all kids in the district. The other thing that they are going to be doing under this practice piece is they're going to be using data that they have been given to analyze information. And so when the board members receive their board packet, which literally is an electronic file, electronic through board, right? They receive the packet of information X number of days before their meeting. Their responsibility is to read and review that. And not just read and review, but read and review and ask questions. So in some districts I work with, for example, a governing board member, especially a new one, quite honestly, because you're still learning your role, might shoot off an email to the superintendent to say, Hey, Superintendent, I got a question about page 7, item 3. What is it we're actually talking about here on this agenda? So when we go to vote on it on Tuesday, I'll know what we're talking about. And many times the superintendent will shoot an email back either to the individual or more aptly to the 5 governing board members saying, hey, I got a great question about blah, blah, blah on page 7 and da-da-da-da-da. Let me give you, all of you, the response on that, the information. So now we're building collective knowledge across the board. So part of that is making sure that you've got the data in hand to be able to analyze whatever it is the board's voting on. And theoretically, every board vote that is taken should be in alignment with your district's mission, vision, values, and goals. So as an example, when I pulled up some of your recent minutes, this is the agenda from the meeting on the 15th, right? And so what you'll notice in your packet, if you were to print it out, they have a really standard front end to their agenda. And in it, they identify not only who the governing board members are, but the vision statement of the district, the mission statement, the values, and the 6 goals that the district holds as being the things that they're going to be responsible for. The Scottsdale Unified School District Governing Board and Administration are even doing what I perceive to be an even better job in that when you actually look at their minutes and their agenda, they are tying everything that's on the agenda to any of those 6 goals that the district has. So at any time, you can look at an item that's on the agenda and know, oh, that one's about recruiting and retaining highly effective teachers and investing in their professional development. So that's a really cool thing that this district does that not all districts do. So you can have that level of transparency to know that they're working on things that are in alignment with what your goals are. So the third aspect of this chart here is the governance actions and decisions. And, when you look at what that is, that's really the accountability piece. And so when I think about that, that's about aligning the resources that they have available to them. That is about prioritizing the goals that you have. And it's also about clarifying what the expectations are. And so there's always a lot of stuff. As there's more stuff, as in the previous presentation, I'm kind of a data geek that I love hearing all this new stuff. And it's like, holy cow, how have I lived here for 15 years and not literally known every single aspect of that already? And so if I put myself in your shoes for this session, I'm like, how could we all be parents? And before I had this job, I had an opportunity to know one of your district's previous governing board members. And when we moved here from out of state in 2000, I got to know this individual, and our daughter was still at Anasazi. And I just had a really ignorant question. I didn't know how the process worked, but I had a question. And I didn't mean to throw the question on her shoulder and have her solve it for me. I was just trying to understand, right? And so she gave me the greatest gift, and that was, she explained to me, well, Karen, we actually have a process for that here in the district. We have policies that deal with how we handle that. And so right then and there, on the spot, she did a quick little education piece for me, taught me that, one, it wasn't a stupid question that I had, 2, that there really is transparency in how the district handles things, and here's how I go about doing it. And I thought, oh. And then when I took this job, I thought back on that, and I thought, how many times a day must the board member be doing that very same thing with everybody who's tapping them on the shoulder with the question? That's really one of the jobs of a governing board member, is to educate the parents in the community about the process. And so kudos to the parent council for asking the question, what is it we do? We've elected these people. We sometimes go to the meeting, but what is it they do? What is it they don't do? And how do I interface with them or not, right? So when I look at the bigger picture, I step out here and I say, okay, well, first of all, we have to be clear on what the role of the governing board is, the purpose of what we're here. We've got to be clear on the roles and responsibilities, and I'm going to cover that in a bit more detail in the next few slides. We need to know what the authority is that the board is governed by, and so Arizona Revised Statute 15341 and 342. Can you imagine I know this? This is really scary. Are the aspects of the revised statute that say this is the stuff that governing boards must do, regardless if you're in Scottsdale or anywhere else. This is what you've got to do. And 342 tells you this is stuff you can do, or you can delegate to others to do. And so that authority is an important aspect. The limits are important to know because just like, you know, when the kids are growing up, they want to know they want to test limits, right? They know what black and white is, but they kind of want to figure out what the gray is. Same thing with the governing board. They want to be able to be clear on what their rules are so that you're clear on what the rules are and so that it all works smoothly. So on the outside, Geoff, do you want to talk about this engaging the community piece and how the things that surround that are so important?
Yeah, so these are the areas really where you all as parent groups, as community leaders in and of yourselves come in here. You are able to hold the governing board accountable to make sure that they know what community members know, what they feel they don't know, what the pulse is of the folks on the ground, right? You're able to tell them which stakeholders they should be talking to. You're able to build that capacity that they, as governing board members, may not have on their own, right? But you're that connection. This is where it really comes in, is holding them accountable on these areas. That communication. Are they following these practices, these commitments, these decisions, that they made? Are they holding true to the goals that they've outlined? That's really where that advocacy comes in. I mean, you can think about it too. We just had a presentation from your city government, right? If you have a broken trash can, right, you're not going to go to council members Millhaven and Smith over there and tell them, I need you to fix my trash can, right? But they may be able to inform you on the process. They may be able to tell you. You may be able to talk to them about, well, there are broken trash cans all over the city, right? We don't have, our street lights are busted all along this street. Our ballparks have light bulbs and we are so old we can't replace them anymore, right? This is how they learn, and you are that liaison, you are that connection, right? And you are that sense of accountability that they have. And I really think that these areas outside here are the sort of areas where groups like yourselves really can shine as far as holding the governing board to their responsibilities.
Absolutely. Thank you. So you might hear me use the term senior leadership team frequently when I talk about governing boards and districts, because the senior leadership team is the superintendent, the 5 governing board members in your case, and then depending on the district, the size, the depth, width, and all that stuff of the district, perhaps other administrators, and including, in your case, for example, Saunders is the board secretary, because a lot of the interactions that happen between the governing board members and the superintendent, or even with our office, comes through that board secretary. And so it's really important to know that it's not just about the success of the individual group, but it's about the collective success of all of you in the district and you as parents and community members bring to it. And so we're always looking for opportunities to make sure that the expectation is you got to communicate a lot, that we want to be in a position where there aren't any surprises, and that people are educated with data, with information, and that they've had the time to ask the questions they need to. Being really clear on what's my role versus your role, so again, we're not stepping over each other. Obviously, learning as a team is important, and equally important to me, I think, is recognizing the successes that happen along the way. And so by building those celebratory moments into your agendas, you're recognizing the kids and the parents are coming, And so they're starting to learn more about what's going on. And so there, I mentioned a little bit about policies. There is a policy that your district has called Policy BBA, Roles and Responsibilities. And when I go out and do training, this is like the first thing that I look at. This is your district's set of policies on how your 5 board members have agreed to do business. And so this is my paraphrasing of what your policy BBA says. I thought I'd share it with you. First of all, it talks about becoming familiar with the laws of the education system, and that's that due diligence that any new person who takes on a new role needs to learn, right? And the next one is working harmoniously. And this one actually is a little longer statement, but basically it's saying working harmoniously, and the intent is also that it's not that the person is hogging your time, but it's also that they're not standing away and letting everybody else do everything. So the working harmoniously for the good of the district is about making sure everybody on the board is working collectively. Voting and acting impartially for the district good. Just rest my soul, it's a good thing when I see this, because to me, this makes me understand that the district and the board members are clear that it's about all kids in the district. Not the ones that live with them, look like them, sound like them, or otherwise resonate with their passion. It's about all kids. And so when the 5 governing board members are voting on things, because that's where their power is, in the boardroom when they're voting, it's really about, are they doing that on behalf of all the kids in their district? The next one is one that oftentimes gives, and again, I'm saying this from across the state because I'm all over the state, giving wholehearted support. So your board is a 5-member board, and so a quorum of a 5-member board is 3 members, okay? And so a board vote passes when at least 3 members of the 5 members who are present vote on something, right? Well, it's easy when it's a 5-0 vote. All of the board members support whatever the vote was, right? And so giving wholehearted support is really easy, right? But what does support look like when it's a 3-2 vote or a 4-1 vote, right? And so in our opinion at ASBA, the understanding is that the board has voted on something. It's passed with a majority of vote. And now it is the responsibility of the board members to support wherever the district is going with that thing. It doesn't necessarily mean they can't have a personal opinion about it, but the board has spoken through their vote, and so now they are in support of whatever those next steps are. And so you might think, well, doesn't that sort of deflate, you know, my personal opinion or whatever? And I'm like, well, yeah, but you're one of 5 on the vote. And so once the vote is taken, you're moving ahead with whatever it is the board has voted on. Responsibility for confidentiality is obviously an important one. And when I see this one, I immediately think of executive sessions. And so there are 3 types of meetings that a governing board member might participate in. One is their regularly scheduled monthly meeting that they hold, that the agenda's been sent out, it's on the website, you know about it, they've identified all the stuff, and through their policies, it's actually identified the order of the stuff that they're doing. The second meeting is what I would call a special meeting, so a work-study session. Those are the ones oftentimes that I come to, and I work with boards, because those are more dialogue, problem-solving, discussion, brainstorming, training kind of meetings. There's also a format in their policy about how those meetings go. And then the third meetings are executive sessions. And by state law, there are only 8 reasons why a governing board could go into an executive session. And they're things that make logical sense. Personnel issues, attorney issues, talking about selling or buying land, and you don't want the people to know that you're looking to buy or sell the land and how much you're willing to pay for it, right? And so those kind of things go into an executive session. And so the public is not invited into those sessions. But if they're speaking with an individual about whatever their topic is, that person is invited in, right? And so when you talk about confidentiality, what goes on in those meetings in executive session stay in the executive session. There's still minutes that need to be taken, but those minutes are only shared with the people that were in the room or involved in that aspect of the conversation. The board still has to come out of executive session, and they cannot do any voting in executive session. None whatsoever. And so they might talk about things, but if they want to actually take action on something, they have to have come out, and it's already has to have been on the agenda to say possible action on blah, 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 right? And then, and only then, is the board able to actually vote on whatever it was that was there. And that assumes that it was actually on the agenda. So how many of you have gone to a board meeting where you wanted to talk passionately about something? Okay? And how many times have that something not been on the agenda? Okay? Doesn't that intuitively sound frustrating? That like you want to come, you want to talk about something, but the board is not already planned to talk about it. So in Scottsdale, you guys are taking advantage of the call to the public, which is your opportunity to speak in those 3 minutes, I think. Is that what it is? And so what will happen is, and this is something that I as a parent totally didn't get, that the meeting is the meeting of the board for which they have invited you to be present. It's not the public's meeting. It's the board's meeting for which the public's been invited. And so your call to the public is your opportunity to speak about those things. But if I stand up there in my 3 minutes and I make the most eloquent presentation about why we need to build a new football stadium and we need to da-da-da, it's like I got the room hyped about it, and all of a sudden they're going, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, the board will sit there and say, thank you. Next person, please. Don't they like just want to kill you to the quick, right? You're like all pumped up, right? It's not on the agenda. They can't talk about it. But what they can do is they can potentially add it to another agenda, a future agenda. They can refer it to the superintendent for further insight or research or whatever. But they can't take my passionate plea to heart and vote on something that is not even on the agenda, okay? So I didn't get that as a parent as I'm sitting in the meetings initially. Now it's like, oh, I got it, okay. The other one I want to point out is this last one, referring complaints. So here's the example. You know, you're going to the Circle K to fill up your gas tank. I'm a board member, I'm filling up my tank, I think I'm doing whatever I'm supposed to be doing, getting off to my next meeting, and a parent taps me on the shoulder and says, hey Karen, what is going on with Mrs. Smith in that second grade classroom? Did you know that blah, 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 and I want you to fix it, right? So that parent or community member is wanting the board member to own an issue. Well, would it surprise you that there's actually a policy in the Scottsdale Unified School District Policy B that says how you handle these things? There actually is. And so that example I was giving you before of the person who told me, that's really what she was doing. Is she was educating me that there's actually a process here. And so what that board member might want to do is they might be really enamored with your idea, but they're creating a liability if they take it on their shoulder. So really, their response to you might be, give me a little bit of clarifying information just so I know what we're talking about. That's fine. But their next question might be, have you talked to Mrs. Smith about that? Right? They might say, let me refer you to the superintendent. Now, because they're not to own that issue, for a lot of reasons. One, the who and the what, the how and the what, right? Theirs is not to make those decisions because ultimately that thing could come up as an agenda item on the board. And if it does, they have to recuse themselves from the discussion and the vote. And so now we've depleted kind of like why we even were going there. So in your case, in the district, Bonnie, I'm going to ask you a question. If something happens, if you get that tap on the shoulder, am I right in saying in Scottsdale Unified, it's perfectly acceptable to say, let me defer this to the superintendent? Okay?
Generally, how I would handle it is to ask the person if they've gone to the person nearest the problem.
Right.
And then also, Scottsdale Parent Council was very involved about 8 years ago in creating a complaint process that is online, and anybody can go and go through that process.
Okay.
But generally, you want to go to the person that's closest.
And
to
so,
the problem.
can you see where perhaps as a new board member, I wanna get involved in your question because I'm still learning, right? And so, in one hand, I'm thinking maybe that a board member might want to get a little bit more information, but it truly is in their best interest to escalate it to whomever is the appropriate party. So if you as a parent are sitting, or the one that's tapping them on the shoulder, and they say something like that to you, they've just given you the gift that I was given 15 years ago by saying we have a process here. This is how we do it here. So that's one of the things that I see when I talk to people that are nominees or running for office, that they don't understand that aspect. So when you actually look at your website, there's a section called Governing Board, and you'll notice that that's the drop-down menus that are from it. So if you go to this last clickable item here, this is the link to the policies that your district, your specific district has, that the board has already voted on and that the administration is implementing, whatever that is. This is the actual link to it, which is, so this is this. And the website they are utilizing is an ASBA-based system where we have all the policies of all the districts across the state of Arizona, and we work with them to update them and to advise them of legal changes and whatnot. And so you as a parent could actually go in and choose to see another district. And you could go in and log in to see any other district in the state's policies on the same thing. So policy BBA in Scottsdale is policy BBA in wherever, but the board might have tweaked the language of it by board vote, and that's how that district kind of handles things. You'll also notice that you have the ability to watch live board meetings. It tells you about your 5 board members, and this gives you a schedule of your upcoming meetings. And then it also gives you the actual link, or it actually gives you the documents that are available. So for those of you who are visual like I am, so this is a screenshot yesterday of what that meetings document notices page looks like. So what it says to me, and here I got one of my reading glasses, is that September 17th, there was a special study session, that second kind of meeting, and there was a notice of what the meeting was, and you can actually click on it and pull up the notice of the meeting. When you go back to the September 15th meeting, it gives you the meeting agenda, and let me kind of come back down, and they're all color-coded by the type of meetings they are. And so if you come down to some of the older ones, you actually have the copies of the PowerPoints, the budget forms, the whatever those attachments are that you can look at in advance or at the meeting if you bring a device or whatever. And so the district is trying to be extremely transparent in all the information that's available to you. And then ultimately, it's the board secretary's responsibility to type up the minutes from the meeting and add those as well to this. So the district's done a really nice job of trying to get all the information in one place for you to look at, certainly for the board members to look at, so that when they get to the table, they have all the data that they need to. I don't know if I have another slide or not. Oh, yeah, I totally forgot. Okay, so let me go through some examples of what physically the difference is, that kind of what and the how thing. So when you look at this column, the items line up across from each other, okay? So if the board, as an example, is approving and reviewing the budget, it's the superintendent and the cabinet's responsibility to actually recommend a budget that they can approve, that they can review and then approve. So this is very much an iterative process, the budget process. So it's, in the case of your district, I'm sure it's many, many meetings, multiple special study sessions. But ultimately, it does come down to, this is what the administration is recommending, and this is what the board is going to vote on. And so, as an example, in any case, the board is going to be requesting information from the administration, and the administration is going to be providing information to them. Whatever the issue is going to be recommended by administration and considered by the board. Similarly, from a policy perspective, one of the roles they play with our organization is there really are 4 different ways a policy could change. One is the law changes of the country. And so we say, hey, to be compliant with the law, districts in Arizona, we, ASBA, suggest you look at your policy, blah, 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 and vote to make these changes to be compliant with the law. That goes on the agenda, and after 2 board meetings of discussion, they vote on it. The second is similar in that the state law changes, or maybe the county law changes or something, and you guys need to be in compliance with that as well. The third option is what I call a best practice, that somebody thinks up something that never existed before. So, like 10 years ago, who would have thought that e-cigarettes would have been an issue, right? And so there wasn't a policy on e-cigarette usage of students, let alone staff. And so at some point, best practice-wise, we put out a proposal for the districts to use, and boards voted on that. And then the fourth is a district themselves say, hey, we want to create a policy on blah, blah, blah. And so in any case, it's the recommendation coming out of administration and the board voting on what those are. So when you look at that list, what you see, take a look at the word choice here. So approve, evaluate, request, consider, adopt. Those are the actions that boards do, as compared to the superintendents that manage the district, that they recommend, they monitor, they report out on, they provide information, they recommend policy changes, they implement the things. So you can see where there's the difference between the two. Let me give you one more set of examples. So as I mentioned earlier, the superintendent is the employee of the board. Now what I did not say was that the superintendent has 5 bosses. I did not say that. The superintendent has one boss called the governing board, which when at the table is when they are in their power. And so it's the responsibility of the board to hire, provide performance reviews, right? Replace the superintendent. It's the superintendent's responsibility to do that same sort of thing for all the rest of the people in the district. Evaluation we talked about. So it's the board's responsibility to delegate the day-to-day stuff to the superintendent. And it's the superintendent's responsibility to find the right person on their staff. So one of the very first ASBA events I attended, I remember somebody telling the story or using the analogy about a governing board member who was a plumber by trade. And he was out at the track watching his son's track meet. And he noticed as he looked over that this water fountain was spewing water. And he thought, oh, I'm a plumber. I can just go fix this. Is that the role of the board member to fix the plumbing at the school district? No. It's the role of the board member to advise the superintendent that there's this water gushing out so that the superintendent can find the right person to fix the water, right? And that always stuck at me as a really good example of how we all bring to the table our skills, but we need to do it under the auspices of what our responsibilities are. And so even though this guy was a plumber, in that situation, his job was not to fix the plumbing. His job was to let the superintendent know there was an issue with the plumbing. Okay? So when you look at this list again, and you look at the words, so the boards vote on things, they evaluate, they delegate, they approve, whereas the superintendents recommend, manage, implement. Kind of, again, that really clear distinction, hopefully, for you between the roles. So one of the last things I want to mention is about team ethics. And when I took you and talk about leadership team, I invite you to think about the different groups that you are a part of and organizations you might have been involved with, and how isn't it important to have ethical boundaries for you in your workplace, in your faith community, in your whatever nonprofits you're involved in. It's the same thing with governing boards. And so, obviously, one of the things that board members should be doing is attending meetings. Okay. Another is obviously listening to people and being objective. And so the listening is a two-way street, obviously, and it's about also using the data, the fact-based data that's available to the board so that they can make an independent judgment for the best will of all the kids in the district. This next one talks about not compromising the district, and part of that is outside of a meeting, unless they have been voted by the board to represent the board at this thing, they are representing themselves. They're not representing SUSD. They're representing themselves. And so it's sometimes, especially in some of these really rural and small communities that I work with, it's really, really hard to differentiate that because you can see it, right? I mean, everybody's related to somebody. Everybody kind of works with somebody else, and their daughter works here, and their son-in-law's there, and so it's hard, but it's always about keeping the right hat on. Avoiding conflicts of interest. An example I would use is if my husband owned a flooring company, and let's say the district was going to re-carpet all of the libraries, let's say in the district. If I was a governing board member, and I fully expect my husband to submit a quote for that resurfacing the library carpets, should I as a governing board member vote on that? No. Conflict of interest, right? So I need to recuse myself from the conversation and the vote on that. And there are some things that, well, a lot of things that the board just has to be really mindful of is, am I being put in that situation? If so, I need to remove myself. But if I'm not, and I'm at the table, it's my obligation to vote on the things that have been brought forward to them. We've already talked about using the chain of command, and I want to focus on this keeping your promise, because as a parent in the district, I see this one a little bit differently. And so if, for example, somebody is running during the election cycle for a governing board, I would encourage you to be very cautious about the promises that they are giving you, because they're only one of 5 board members. And where is their power? At the table. And are they a quorum? Can they in and of themselves change the vote? No, they're one of 5 people. And so as much as I'm absolutely all about keeping their promises, I also would encourage any board member, any parent community member to not overpromise something that they can't really do, right? So part of this is really about educating you on the process, what the stuff is. And so if I kind of think about what the buckets are, it's helping get the district going in the right direction. It's making sure that the goals and the structures through the policies are in place, that they have built into their board meetings a measure to ensure that there's accountability in the goals being accomplished and the money being spent. And then, oh yeah, it's about the kids, right? It's all about the kids. So making sure that they are an advocate for the children. So in the course of our short amount of time today, I really wanted to step back and say, if I was looking in on the role of our 5 governing board members, what is it they do? How do I interact with them? And what opportunities for you might there be to learn more about what I do every day, and within the Scottsdale School District. So we do have a couple minutes for questions. Obviously, Geoff is the expert on all the advocacy stuff, and he's the whiz at that. So between the two of us, I think we can pretty much answer any questions you might have.